Be the first to know what's new on TJC. Breaking news, award-winning movies, exciting documentaries, and original series. Sign up for our free bi-weekly email program guide at tjctv.com.
Our mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at the age of 39.
She passed away at 43.
I was just 17 years old.
A broken gene had caused her cancer.
Is there breast or ovarian cancer in your family? You should be familiar with hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndrome, HBOC.
With counseling and a blood test for HBOC, we learned that both Lauren and I have the same broken gene our mom had.
This test helped save our lives.
Visit learnabouthboc.com and let this information work for you.
Welcome to the Salon. Coming up, the transgender professor who made history at Yeshiva University shares her story. Plus, are millennials really Generation I? Weighing in on Obama's endorsement of same-sex marriage. And why is everyone talking about the new HBO show Girls? It's coming up right now on the Salon.
Hello, I'm Jane Eisner, editor-in-chief of The Forward and Forward.com.
I'm Rachel Sklar, founder of ChangeTheRatio.com.
And we welcome you to the Salon. Rachel, we have a wonderful group of women here again with us, and it's graduation season.
I know. It's not that relevant to me anymore, as much as I look like a student. But I understand that you've got graduations in your family.
I do. My youngest daughter graduates college. My oldest daughter graduates with a master's degree, so it's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
So much nachas.
Yes. So if you were going to give a speech, what do you think you would say?
Oh, you mean to address the young, eager graduates? What would I say? I think I would say don't take the criticism too seriously, and don't lose sight of the thing that you really want to do. That's probably
good.
What I would say.
I've given a few commencement addresses, and I think the message that I was most happy about was one in which I just implored them to be grateful, like to really be thankful for what you have, because I wish I would have remembered that when I was in my 20s, that's for sure.
I'm still in my 20s, and I think about that all the time.
Well, joining us today are three terrific women. We have Joy Ladin, who is the first openly transgender professor at Yeshiva University. She is the author of a new memoir, Through the Door of Life, A Jewish Journey Between Genders. And Liz Nord is a documentary filmmaker and multimedia producer who's currently working on a film, Battle for Jerusalem, about a modern Orthodox city councilwoman in Jerusalem who's fighting against gender discrimination. And Allison Goldberg, who is co-creative director of Lively Productions, where she produces and performs in an ongoing series called Blogalogs, in which an ensemble of actors perform the internet completely verbatim. Welcome to you all. So we've been reeling with the extremely important news that President Obama has stated his support for same-sex marriages. This is, no matter what your feelings about it, might be a watershed moment for America. What do we make of all of this, Liz? What is your reaction to it?
It's a watershed moment, and actually one of the things that surprised me is how so many people have tried to reduce its significance. A lot of my friends, even on the left, have said, oh, well, better late than never, or, gee, isn't that convenient that he just came out and said this in time for his re-election campaign? And I think that's really unfair. I actually think, listen, he may have said it too late, whatever, but he said it. He's said it. He's the only one that has. Even our sort of paragon of modern liberalism, Bill Clinton, passed the Defense of Marriage Act. So Obama has gone a 180, and I really commend him for it.
One of our columnists, Jay Michelson, had a really wonderful piece on our website in which he talked about the whole idea that in Judaism we believe in revelation and taking the idea of evolution not as a negative but actually as a positive. This is someone who has been very honest about the evolution of his own ideas. Does that strike you as authentic, Joy?
Yes. I think that Obama, one of the things that's strange about him is that he thinks and talks in terms of processes rather than positions. And we're not used to politicians doing that. But clearly as a society and as individuals, our feelings about something like same-sex marriage do change. They've changed a lot for all of us, but he's strange for coming out and saying it.
That's such a great way of phrasing it, processes instead of positions, which I think that, you know, particularly the attitudes on the right about this are very dogmatic. And I think Mitt Romney's counter to that was like, well, I still think that gay couples can adopt. And it's like, well, if they can adopt, then what exactly is the sanctity of marriage that you're protecting supposed to be about if it's not about the family? Just there's no sort of like very clear sense of where these positions are coming from. But when you're talking about the process, then there actually is a sense of where the positions are coming from, because you can see their evolution.
Well, I mean, I'm older than probably most of you, and I will admit my views on this have changed. I would never have imagined it 20 years ago, 25 years ago. You could probably find columns of mine in which I endorsed civil union and didn't endorse marriage, because it was something that, frankly, I had to get used to too. And I think we may as well be honest about that and you know, recognize that people's views can change.
But also I think the word evolution was a really, really interesting choice. And until I heard it come out of your mouth just now, I hadn't even thought about it in this way. But when we put it in the religious context, we are all looking at this evolution as a positive thing, and Obama meant it as a positive thing, but something like 40% of our country identify as evangelical and don't necessarily believe in evolution. So I wonder what that means as far as Obama's word choice. Was he talking about something even bigger? Was he sort of, you know, winking?
But Ali, is this something like you're a millennial? We're going to talk about that later. But does the notion of gay marriage seem like ridiculously antiquated, that it would not even be that it's even an issue to sort of your generation, or is this something that's talked about and debated?
Not to pull my family into this immediately, my aunts are lesbians. And it's interesting because I actually think my generation is much more gung-ho about it. I'm surprised how much my aunts are not, because for them, they've been together for 35 years. It really doesn't change anything in their minds. I mean, the rest of our family thinks for legal reasons, let's go to court. But for my friends from college, it's really amazing, because they said, you know, they grew up as children, realized they were gay, and this was not an option on the table, and suddenly, around marrying time, it is an option. And so friends from college, gay men are starting, and women are starting to get married. So it's amazing. And I mean, I hope that Obama, that this will really be galvanizing. I mean, I think it also may be polarizing, but I think that the ball was already rolling. It's really amazing how it's progressed so much faster than a lot of other civil rights movements. But I do hope that him actually, as Liz was saying, finally announcing it and going there will power the movement even further.
But we still have 30 states in this country that have banned same-sex marriage, North Carolina being the most recent one. Is this going to end up like abortion, where you know, there's pretty strict battlegrounds? Battle lines, I should say.
You know, I think that there are two, like, you know, I think about this because I have a girlfriend. We're in a committed relationship. When this sort of started becoming a public issue, I was in the middle of a terrible divorce, and there was a cartoon that said, you know, gay marriage, haven't they suffered enough? And I really related to that because you know, I was experiencing what the legal machinery actually could do to you if the marriage doesn't end up working out. And I know that gay people have said, wow, now we have to gauge our relationships in a different way. Like, well, how serious are you, and are you ready to commit? I mean, these were just not discussions you would have.
They have a built-in excuse that just ended.
Exactly. Or another way to put it is you had, out of necessity, you defined your relationships not in terms of socially sanctioned categories. So your relationship was whatever you guys made it up to be at any given moment. So I think that's a point of view that isn't often talked about, which is how are they affected by this, and how are gay people within the Jewish community affected by seeing this become available to some people and not other people, or say, I can walk into the county clerk's office and get married, but I can't walk into my synagogue and have people say Mazel Tov.
Well, it's definitely an issue. We saw recently there was an Orthodox rabbi who performed a marriage of two men and received a great deal of criticism for it. Tremendous backlash, I think, more than he was expecting. And I think there's a real challenge to halakha, and there's a real challenge to tradition that we're going to see, I think, playing out a lot.
I actually have a funny anecdote about a Reformed Jewish friend from the States who went to a gay wedding between two men in Canada where it's legal across the whole country. And she was so uncomfortable at the wedding, not because it was two men getting married, but because it was so religious. It was a Jewish wedding, and she wasn't familiar with, these sort of more traditional Jewish weddings. And she was like, oh, it's so religious, and the rabbi didn't even make a mention or give any hint that this wedding would be any different from any other wedding he's ever performed.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, yes, Joy.
I'm sorry, you mentioned halakha, and the halakha starts from where a lot of the socially problematic halakha starts. They're laws that were designed to distinguish Israelites from Canaanites or from Egyptians. So if those nations had been Puritans, Judaism would be the most fun, permissive religion in the world. God would say, you have to have wild parties and wild sex because the nations don't do that. But instead it worked the other way. And that's what I think will make it hard for more traditional communities to wrestle with this, because the point of the halakha at its root is about distinguishing between Jews and non-Jews. And that, if you're a Reformed Jew, you've made a different decision. You've said, no, we want to be both. That's not the way we build Jewish identity, through these kinds of distinctions. But if you're a traditional Jew, that sense of creating distinction is pretty core to the whole religion.
Wow, that's a very, very good point. So it could have been different. We could have been able to eat shrimp. Who knew?
Commanded to.
Commanded to eat it.
That's where the discussion ended up.
That's right.
We want some more shrimp.
Joy, I wanted to ask you about another topic that's also been in the news, though perhaps not quite as momentous. But we've read recently of a teacher at a Catholic school in Indiana who was fired because she went through IVF treatments, and that is against Catholic teaching. And you have been in a situation where you've been working at a religious institution, Yeshiva University, and have done something that could be perceived to be against religious tradition. Yet the outcome for you was much different. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little about that.
Well, what I did, in transitioning from living as a man to living as a woman, it is against tradition. It's against halakha in various ways, but it's also more definitionally against tradition. There are some differences. One is that because Yeshiva University is a university that gets federal and state money, it sees itself as bound by federal and state law, and that's different than if you say we're just a religious institution. But the issue that I think is the same is religious communal institutions see everybody in the community who's in a position of authority as a moral exemplar. And that, I think, is where the push to get everybody who's teaching or doing anything where you look up to them to follow religious doctrine comes from. Legally, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, the IVF firing, in terms of U.S. law, it's a non-issue. They shouldn't have done it. But as a religious community, there is a strong argument that you want the people who you vest with that kind of authority to promote the norms, moral norms, and traditions of the community.
Although that is exceptionally doctrinaire. Actually, I heard that on the news, on TV, and I sort of I stopped what I was doing and I whipped around because I was just so stunned. Because the act of procreation is defined so narrow. There's really only one way you can do it, guys. So, guys and girls, and that's it. So I was genuinely stunned because I did not know that IVF was seen as heresy at all. It's if anything, it seems to me to, again, as for processes and not policies, it seems to naturally follow from the ultimate goal, which is that loving families should raise wonderful children.
Absolutely, and maybe you guys have an answer to this, because I didn't even get the story. I understand that the church has problems with abortion and birth control because they may prevent life, and that makes some kind of sense to me. but this woman's trying to have a baby. Like, isn't that ultimately what the church wants? So I don't understand
They want
what
you
the
having
issue
sex,
is.
apparently.
Well,
I mean,
it's partly
congrats
that,
for that, but you
what
know.
they don't want to do is desacralize the process of starting a new life. So they want it to be located in human bodies and not in laboratories and test tubes. They don't, because once you move that into laboratories and test tubes, it becomes part of the secular world where there is, you know, in science there isn't God in the same way that there is. So if you want to live in a God-centered universe and you say, well, one of the key things about God is the way life begins, I think that's, I'm not Catholic, but I think that's really where it's coming from.
But who's to say God didn't create this methodology for, you know, God didn't give the idea to a scientist to create this methodology for a woman who can't otherwise become impregnated to give birth?
Not me.
I think, I think there also may be just a more narrow thing, which is that, you know, you're going to destroy some embryos to create some. And so I think that there are people who might be concerned about even that. You know, those of us who've been fortunate enough to have children, you know, I feel so strongly, having, you know, been pregnant 3 times happily and intentionally and blessedly without, you know, major complications. But, you know, I don't think that that little glob of cells is a person yet. I mean, it really, talk about an evolution inside of you. It takes several months before you even feel like maybe this might become a child. But there certainly are people who will take the idea of when life begins way back in the process. And so I think that might be part of it as well. But I think, you know, Joy, the point that you made is a really interesting one, which is how much do we expect and can allow religious institutions to control who is in a position of authority and leadership. And our law is pretty clear about that. I mean, there's a lot of religious exemption to civil rights laws, and yet there are also those times when religious groups have wanted to impose a certain standard on their institutions, even when they are publicly funded. And I think Yeshiva University ought to be commended for taking that point of view.
I'm really glad that you're saying that. I think that Yeshiva University has done incredible things I mean, really every day that I show up for work is a miracle. And there are trans Jews living in hiding in the Orthodox world. They want to be Orthodox because to them that's the way you serve God. This is as much a part of their identity as being transgender. But so they look at Yeshiva University and they say, there's hope. Right? It's not that I'm doing anything, I'm just there, but the fact that I can be there in the Orthodox world and there are no riots, nobody's ever been disrespectful to me, it is amazing.
That's great.
Well, you certainly strike me as of the highest order of moral exemplar. So
Thank you.
You're doing them a credit.
So let's take it into a different direction, this conversation of ours. And because we also want to talk about what's going on with younger people, and we do have Allison here as an example of her generation.
Young person.
hey, and Liz too.
And everyone else.
And Rachel, of course, who really is no more than 22.
I'm only 5.
Thank you for noticing.
So, you know, there have been these studies lately talking about the millennials, which is a term that is kind of fuzzy and overused, I think, but still tends to refer to people who are in their 20s as a generation that doesn't have the kind of staying power, certainly that their grandparents may have had, and maybe even that their parents had, in the economy and relationships and other ways. Allison, is that a fair characterization?
Well, I mean, obviously, I'm going to think it's ridiculous. I do think any stereotype of an entire generation is ridiculous, but especially as a Jewish woman, probably everyone in this room is either the child of an immigrant or the grandchild of an immigrant, great-grandchild. So I think it's actually amazing that we've reached this point, that we have so many opportunities, and that work is no longer something that is work necessarily, that you do to make money and you do for the rest of your life. And my mother actually said to me once how amazing she thinks it is, and her friends, that I'm able to go pursue my dream. And also, my parents don't support me, just for the record. So that's a big stereotype of millennials too. So yeah, I don't think that indicates any selfishness or lack of commitment.
you are being raised now in a world where there are so many more options, so many more role models with so many more options that your parents and grandparents, it never would even occurred to them to think might ever be available.
Well, so that's the thing. People say, you know, there are all these studies that millennials switch jobs all the time and things like that. And I just think, I mean, first of all, you're interviewing people at their first job. I'm not doing what I thought I'd be doing at 22. But also, you know, I don't think it's not flip-flopping. I mean, I have friends, first of all, who've been in the same job since we graduated, but also when people switch jobs, they bring their experience into the new position. I don't think it indicates that they're not committed to the job they're at or that they're just going to get up and leave. And it's honestly, I mean, as we all know, it's really not as easy as a 22-year-old might think to get up and leave, especially if you are supporting yourself.
And I think that's more a reflection of the economy than anything else. Right. I mean, I think this is also an economy in which you can't expect to have a job for life. I mean, gone are the days where you join the law firm or the bank or, you know, I look at, I mean, I'm married to a doctor and I'm a journalist, and my husband and I have both switched jobs a real lot. And you would have expected that we would have been in the kind of professions where, you know, you go to one newspaper or you start, you know, taking care of patients or teaching, and you just stay and do that for 30 or 40 years. And I mean, part of it is because we are exciting, ambitious people, but it's also because of changes in the economy and the places in which we've worked.
Well, it's a bizarre criticism at a time of massive layoffs and high unemployment to say, you guys just don't stick to your jobs the way you know you should. But the whole idea of moralizing the relationship between the employee and the employer, that seems really strange.
It's very interesting, you know, this study that came out that it framed all of the data in the negative. So I think it's very in the, you know, with the supposition that the employee ought to be loyal to the employer. So that the data wasn't framed like employers are doing a really bad job of giving an experience to millennials that make them want to stick around. Like, I think that that's really more of the crux of things, is that, you know, why should a millennial, a new graduate, skilled, you know, having been weaned on the internet, so has a whole panoply of skills that a lot of people do not have, that is massively important right now, why shouldn't they leave to find something better if they're not satisfied where they are? It's an employer's responsibility to provide a wonderful place that is nurturing for someone to want to stay in.
Also, you're growing up into a time when businesses are saving themselves by cutting pensions. They're saying we're not going to honor agreements that we made to our loyal, committed employees. So if I'm in your position, I'm not thinking that I'm going to, you know, there's nobody on the other end to reciprocate that loyalty. I'm sorry, Liz.
Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, though, I don't know that the survey was totally framed in terms of, you know, negatively, although it had negative, I think, outcomes. But I think there was one of its critiques of the millennials, which I agree, you know, you don't want to just blanket, but one of this survey's critiques of the millennials was their sort of expectations of an employer. And I'll say from my experience, in 2008, I ran the election coverage at MTV News, and part of the initiative was that we had 51 millennial reporters, one from every state plus DC, who were covering the election from their perspectives, and I was their supervisor. And this was an amazing opportunity for them in every way. You know, these young people were getting their work out on a major scale, and I found again and again, rather than sort of them being appreciative and looking at me and my staff as kind of supervisors, which we were, or mentors even, which we hope to be, there was a general sense of we were there to serve them. They got this opportunity because they're so wonderful, and we as their employers were not, you know, their superior, let alone their partner, but we were there to enable them to show the world their greatness. And that, it was a bit of a shock, because even when I started in the job world not that long before, I had a totally different kind of relationship with my supervisors.
I think the technological revolution has empowered younger people to feel expert in ways that their elders aren't. I mean, boy, you know, when I first got some tutoring from a younger staff member on Facebook, and she said, "Oh yeah, I just helped my mother do that. I'll help you too." And I was like, "Oh, thanks a lot."
You're on Twitter now.
Yeah, but I hear you. You know, I think that being facile in technology when people even 10 or 20 years older than you are not, gives you a sort of skill that upends the generational sort of power.
Absolutely. We were at our desks working while they were coming home after school and hopping on their computer. I mean, that is the reality of it.
But
so
there's
they've got
something
this
else.
training.
It's the technology, but it's more, and I think Allison really is a great example of this, that traditional media have this kind of pyramid structure where when you are inexperienced, you have a lot of people to prove yourself to get published, right? You're an editor, so that's a lot of what you do is not publish people. Most of the people in the world have not been published by you, and you wouldn't publish them. So that's the traditional structure, is there's a limited number of ways of getting yourself out into the world, and those ways are controlled by people who are much older, to whom you have to prove yourself, who had to prove themselves. But this kind of media means that those hurdles can be leapt over. I mean, Allison can just invent a form of publication, a whole art form, and it's immediately out there. She doesn't need to prove it to a whole bunch of older people.
Well, I still do for theater, but yes, you make a very valid point. Well, first of all, for Liz, there is no excuse for people being obnoxious or disrespectful. I'm ashamed of my generation for that point. You know, and definitely I still view older people as mentors, because even if they don't know a thing about technology, they've gone through many hurdles that I have not. And I think that someone who doesn't understand that, that's very unfortunate. But yes, what you're saying, not most, but a vast amount of my classmates from Yale are working in jobs that were not invented when we were in college, which is what's really so mind-boggling every day. And what you were saying, the playing field is different because they just start their own companies. Like I went to school with Justin of Justin TV, you know, so it's really a crazy world that way.
So just sticking with that for a minute, I'm wondering if you can enlighten somebody like myself, who maybe I'm the only person on the planet who has not yet seen the new HBO show, The Girls, but it's been pretty controversial. And I was wondering, why do you think it's become so talked about, so popular?
There's a lot of answers to that. Because, first of all, I hate the show, just putting it out there. I want to like it because it's about young girls and they have a voice, even though I don't think it's my voice. But I actually think it's fascinating that it's getting so much attention. I am not sure why. There are so many other shows out there that aren't, especially with the whole attack in terms of race. I mean, I definitely want to see diversity on television, but it's interesting that the
criticism is that it's predominantly or exclusively white?
There are no characters of color that are not sort of like
main characters.
Yeah, like but there's
so
like pretty absent. Like there's one homeless person, and then you know, one of the characters is watching a game show and there's a black contestant on the game show. Like that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. So continue.
But so I think it's frustrating that, for instance, like How I Met Your Mother, no one was up in arms about the lack of race on that show, and that I don't think that excuses girls. But I find it interesting that the one-time new voices, female voices, are on TV. They're attacked for not showing every other voice as well.
I think that that's related to why it's getting so much attention. I don't think it's that good. I think it's fine. You know, I don't think it's a lot worse than other things, but I don't think that it's the quality of the show that has generated all of this attention. I think the show's attention comes from its representation, its claim to represent a group of people who are not represented. And I think that's where the race stuff comes in. It's like if you are important because you're representing life in a way, in a more democratic way, in a fairer way, getting voices out there that have been suppressed, well, what about all the voices that you're suppressing? And it's a stupid criticism. Does that mean every show has to have certain mixtures? Well, they should all have trans characters, right? You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. But
well, they should. But I actually like the
not all of them. That would be boring.
Right. But I like the criticism that it starts at the studios that are not seeking African American or trans writers.
But also, what about the community? What about our community? If this young woman, the writer director of the show, is saying, "Well, listen, this is representative of she's half Jewish," and she's saying, "This is representative of my Jewish, middle class upbringing," then what can we do as a community to say, maybe we should look at it not as a critique of the media, but as a critique of our community? So how can we make, cultural integration more of a value in our community?
Well, I think the fact that this critique is happening is very interesting, because I feel that this is a new phenomenon. Looking at a representation of any sort of group on TV and noting what is absent. This happened a little bit with Friends when Friends came out, but it was like a very small point noted by people of color and not by the rest of the population. And it certainly wasn't a big hook for the initial media coverage. I mean, when Friends came out, the big deal was the Rachel, her haircut. So I think that the fact that these discussions are being had is one of the things that makes this show very relevant culturally, because the show itself is presenting sort of storylines that you have not really seen outside of indie film, and it's being presented by HBO, and so just by the fact that it's HBO, it's more mainstream. But some of the best cultural criticism I've seen in ages has been triggered by girls. And I like reading about girls so much more than I like watching it. And that's not because I don't enjoy the show. I do, and I think, and after I read the criticism, I really actually enjoy going back and rewatching, because I think that there is a lot that is interesting there. You know, there's the whole issue of the fact that there's the meta narrative of the four main characters in Girls are all actresses who are the children of rich and influential people. And so there's
in real life.
In real life, like Allison Williams is the daughter of Brian Williams, the anchor, and Lena Dunham is the product of a successful artist. Jemima Kirk is the daughter of who is now the man who is now known as the drummer for Bad Company. I assume his name is Kirk. Mamet. Now, the woman who plays Shoshana. Mamet, that's right. So
David Mamet.
Yeah.
I probably got her name wrong.
But I'm sure they're not supported by their parents.
Well, that's what's interesting too. Sorry, that the show is about her being supported by her parents when she must be a very hardworking, proactive person.
Absolutely, and actually on that note, and talking about, I'm going to tie it all together now, talking about the meta-narrative and representation, representation on the back end, I think is really important for us to know that, so I'm an independent filmmaker, and this woman, Lena Dunham, who produces the show or directs the show, comes from the independent filmmaking world. And I think something that's really, really significant about the show, regardless of how we feel about the content, I happen to like it, is that she is a 25-year-old woman who is writing, directing, and starring in this show. And the Center for Women's Media came out with a study at the beginning of this past year, and they basically said gender disparity in American media is at crisis levels. They used the word crisis, and only 11%, I think, of writers of entertainment television are women. And here's this young woman writing this show and on a major network.
And hiring a whole bunch of female writers.
Female writers, it's a female-centric show. I think it's really important to note that sort of as a group of women who are all involved in media in some way.
And again, that meta criticism of what is your provenance for different actors on different shows. I mean, I don't know, I think Jennifer Aniston's dad was a soap star. So it's certainly not unusual to find in our entertainment children of other entertainers or rich people or famous people.
So I needed famous parents to get on HBO.
That's the end. Well, Rachel, looks like we have come to an end of another wonderful conversation.
I could keep talking. With sort of the extended salon. With
our guests. Many thanks again to Joy Ladin, to Liz Nord, and to Allison Goldberg. For all of us at the Jewish Channel, I'm Jane Eisner. I hope that you will continue this conversation on the Sisterhood blog at forward.com.
And I'm Rachel Sklar from Change the Ratio, and I think this conversation exemplifies why the ratio keeps changing, and I'm so happy to be doing it here at the Salon. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.